As consumers in Texas and across the country continue to bear the brunt of a fuel price hike, some experts are making the case for doubling down on renewable energy in the Lone Star State. Dr. Hugh Daigle is a professor at UT Austin's Department of Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering. He's joining us to talk more about this. Dr. Daigle, thank you for your time.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Good afternoon.
Let's talk about renewable energy. How does it really withstand the price shocks that we're seeing with fuel?
Sure. So the thing with renewable energy is that pretty much any country on Earth or any state in the United States has access to renewable energy because you have wind resources, you have solar resources, you can incorporate batteries into your electricity grid. And if you compare that with fossil fuels, those tend to be localized in a few places. And so we depend on this big global supply chain to distribute that to where it's needed. And when parts of that supply chain break down, like what we've seen in the Strait of Hormuz, things can really get bad in terms of prices.
You're talking about economically, everyone has access to that. But the fact that the U.S. has access to its own oil reserves, as well as some of the other countries, that we're seeing, isn't that what some people say is good for the U.S.?
Well, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's absolutely true that we are, a large producer of oil and natural gas. But a lot of that oil gets shipped overseas just because of the way the whole global supplies work. It goes to refineries and that sort of thing. And so we can't really just keep that oil here because we don't really have the capacity to process all of it. We rely on refineries in other parts of the world to turn our oil into usable products. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, let's just keep that oil here.
Yeah, but when you think about particularly after the winter storm, right, we heard a lot of conversation about renewable energy and how much can we actually rely on it. Talk to us about, really how stable those renewable energy sources are.
Sure. So renewable energy, yes, it is intermittent and, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. But what we've seen since Winter Storm Uri, and particularly over the last 2 years, is that there's been a lot of battery storage put on the grid here in Texas. And that really has allowed us to see a large increase in reliability of these renewable energy resources, because now you can store the excess energy. And so, it's not necessarily that they're unreliable. It's just you need to put the right pieces together to make everything work.
And do you think that it could eventually, realistically, be able to reduce our dependence on, the global oil markets?
Oh, absolutely. You definitely see this in places like China. Here in Texas, we've added a tremendous amount of renewables onto the grid, and that's had the result of pushing down the amount of coal that we use to generate electricity. And so, now most of it is wind and solar and natural gas. And so by doing that, you can really insulate yourself from these price shocks that grow out of, relying on oil coming in from other parts of the world.
But I would imagine the infrastructure needed to put in place to really take advantage of these renewable energy sources isn't necessarily cheap, right? Are consumers really potentially going to save some money?
Well, when you actually look at it, renewable energy in many parts of the world is actually less expensive than fossil energy. The real sticking point is that we don't have enough wires to get all that electricity to places where it needs to be. That's the big challenge. Getting those built, getting them permitted. So that's really, I think, what we need to focus on to make this work.
All right. Dr. Daigle from UT Austin, we thank you so much for taking some time out to talk with us today.
I'm happy to be here. My pleasure.